Good evening. Welcome to Left, Right and Centre. Europe is in crisis after Russia's decision to declare two Ukrainian breakaway republics as being independent, following which Russian soldiers called peacekeepers have now reportedly gone into the region, making the prospect of war a very real concern. Some say a very real possibility. Around the world, markets have been hit, oil prices have soared. The big question remains, what exactly are Vladimir Putin's intentions from here on? Ukrainian MPs, Russian officials, Indians who have lived in Ukraine for decades, the world's foremost defense analysts, and our special packages on this program bring you the very latest on the Russia-Ukraine situation. Well, it is the moment the world hoped would never come. But it turns out America's intelligence was correct. Russia's moves on the Ukraine were just a matter of time. The big question, does this mean a larger war? Now, these are the big points in our explainer on why the Ukraine crisis matters. Now, late last night, in an address telecast on Russian state TV, President Putin signed a decree announcing the independence of two Russia-backed areas, Donetsk and Luhansk. We'll tell you about that in a bit. Russia has now deployed what it calls peacekeeping forces into Donetsk, in other words, its own soldiers. The US will announce sanctions at any stage now. Ukraine's president has asked for international support and wants those sanctions to punish Russia. But Germany, in fact, in what are sanctions in a sense, has decided to halt operationalizing the $11 billion Nord Stream 2 natural gas pipeline. That is a huge hit for Russia, but one which will also possibly impact Germany, which relies heavily on Russian natural gas for its economy. Reports suggest that the United Kingdom will now impose sanctions on 5 Russian banks and on 3 very high net worth individuals. The United Nations has condemned the Russian move and has backed Ukrainian sovereignty. India has called for a diplomatic resolution of the crisis. So what exactly is Donetsk and Luhansk, the two breakaway republics that Putin says are now independent? Well, let's take a look at this map. Now, this area in eastern Ukraine is called Donbas. The area includes the cities of Donetsk and Luhansk that you can see over there. These have in fact been controlled by Russia-backed insurgents since 2014. Now, the area you see here is claimed by the insurgents, but is actually controlled by Ukraine, and the line of control over here, known as the line of contact, is located over here. Let's go to the next image over there to show the line of contact. So the big question, will Russia push beyond this line of contact to try and control all of Donbas, which is about 30% of Ukraine?
Считаю необходимым принять уже давно назревшее решение. Незамедлительно признать независимость и суверенитет Донецкой Народной Республики и Луганской Народной Республики.
Ми віримо в те, що війни не буде потужної проти України і не буде широкої ескалації з боку Російської Федерації. Якщо буде, буде запроваджений військовий стан.
中方将继续按照事情本身的是非曲直，与各方接触。乌克兰局势正趋于恶化，中方再次呼吁各方保持克制，认识到落实安全不可分割原则的重要性，通过对话谈判缓和事态。
Now, the immediate impact of Russia's move to grant what it says is independence to the two breakaway republics has been felt in markets around the world. The Sensex has tanked 1,000 points at a stage. International oil prices surged 4%. There was a double-digit fall in Russian stocks and heavy selling in Europe. The US S&P futures was deep in the red. All right, so the world is watching what happens next, but already there's been a hit around the world, certainly in the markets. But the big question, will there be some sort of peace? Can that be maintained? Joining us now, Andrei Ossadchuk, Member of Parliament from Ukraine. I'm also joined by Dmitry Soledov, spokesperson of the Russian Embassy here in New Delhi. Tatiana Kukareva is Deputy Head of Sputnik News websites and Radio Moscow. Thanks very much, Tatiana, for being with us. Dr. Mridula Ghosh is a senior lecturer at the National University of Kiev, Amolia Academy. She's been in the Ukraine, in Kiev, for several decades. Rajiv Gupta runs the largest Indian company in the Ukraine. He's the founder and managing director of the Kusum Group. And we've got a student as well, because we will not forget about the voices of Indian students over there. Anubhav Arya is a third-year student of medicine. I'd like to thank you all very much for being with us. Mr. Soledov, let me come to you first. Is it Russia's intention to stick to Donetsk and Lugansk, or do you intend to push forward to the territorial outline of Donbass itself, which is presently, parts of which is in Ukrainian control?
Yes, hello, good evening. So actually the decision which was made yesterday by our president was dictated by a need to secure Donbass people from further shelling by Ukrainian army. That was the prior task. What will be next? This is a matter of further diplomatic discussions. I'd like to stress that Russia stands for diplomatic solution and further diplomatic discussions, negotiations.
Okay. Tatiana, is it your belief that the talks which were planned between, say, Mr. Lavrov and Secretary Blinken will still go on?
Well, look, nobody's so far announced otherwise, so I do believe that we should wait for any announcement to follow. But just to to follow back on your first question, it's interesting how there have been announcements already from the president that Russia recognizes the republics in their current borders, and yet you still question whether there is some bigger agenda than just keeping peace in the region and saving civilian population of the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics from constant shelling and constant violence that they've endured for 8 years now.
No, Tatiana, that's not what I was actually alluding to. I think what I was alluding to is this, and we'll have that map up. There is a line of contact, and that line of contact is very much a de facto boundary in that area. It's not been properly defined. But the geographical extent of Donbass lies beyond that line of contact. And therefore, if Russia believes...
announcement by the president.
So if Russia believes that they need to secure Donbass, my question is, would Russia therefore move west, right, towards the geographical outline of Donbass itself, beyond the line of contact?
The announcement of the president was very clear that Russia recognizes the current state, the territory that was established before.
Great.
And as far as the line of contact, it's a very nice mentioning it now, because we've the fact of the matter is that Russia has been calling for that line of contact to be respected and for Kiev to pull back troops from that line of contact for years now.
I think you've answered an important question, Tatiana, and correct me if I'm wrong, but what you're suggesting, based on what you have learned, is that Russia doesn't intend to push further west of the line of contact. And I take the point that the line of contact itself, it's not hard and fast. It's not a border. But at this juncture, broadly speaking, Russia does not intend to push west of the line of contact. Is that correct?
I do believe that if our president wanted, and also, again, we're talking about a recognition of the de facto announcement by the two republics that they made in 2014. You're calling them now republics, but they held a public referendum in 2014, and they actually announced themselves as republics. And it's been 8 years since.
Right.
And the only announcement that was made yesterday was the recognition of said independence.
Formalizing what they have announced is what you're saying. All right, fair enough. Andrei, I'll come back to you, Tatiana. Andrei Ossadchuk, is that sort of explanation, and it is the Russian explanation, something that works for you, that at this juncture, Russia perhaps may not extend west any further, to the geographical boundary of Donbass? They might actually position themselves in these areas, the Lugansk and the Donetsk area, and the area which is already under control. Do you believe that that can result in some sort of safety and security in this current scenario?
First of all, the war in Donbass started in 2014, and all this time Russian troops were in the territory of Ukraine. The fact that yesterday Vladimir Putin decided that he wants to recognize so-called republic simply give us a good chance to call things as they are. Russia started the war against Ukraine 8 years ago. Now they make it public and they open the face to the outside world. There is a big manipulation about the borders of this so-called republic, because this so-called republic made internal so-called decisions about their territories, and these decisions are saying that their territories is equivalent to the geographical territories of all oblasts, Lugansk and Donetsk, meaning that in Putin's decisions they are saying about so-called republics, but it is understood that they will continue to blackmail Ukraine and the West, that they will going to further liberalize Ukrainian territories from Ukrainians. That's typical FSB approach, which they were doing in Georgia in 2008. So nothing new for us. It's the war. We're ready. We have allies, and we will fight.
Are you fighting already, Mr. Osachuk?
I'm the member of the parliament. I'm fighting, voting for decisions which help in Ukrainian army, and I'm fighting, talking with our allies. I just returned from the Munich, where I had a great discussion with the UK and US allies, and we have a huge unity of the West against Russian aggression. I will tell you more. Since 2014, we never ever saw such a huge unity of the West against aggressive policy of Russia.
Mr. Osachuk, now the question which I was actually asking you, sir, is there have been reports from Russia that in fact Ukrainian forces have been engaging Russian and forces in the Donbass region of Lugansk and Donetsk. You say that Russia is in fact attacking your forces. I'm just trying to understand from you at the moment, how hot is that line of contact?
Well, we shall not speculate with what who is saying. We have a monitoring mission from European Union, from OSCE, which produce a daily reports of shooting. Ukrainian territory was shooting by Russian regularly. Last week, Ukrainian kindergarten was shooted by the shell, and just by chance, no one was killed. The kids were in the kindergarten at that moment. So that's why for us, it's a reality which is continuing for the last 8 years. Yes, half a year ago or during the last year, the shootings were not so intensive. But for the last week, it is on the same level as it was in 2015 and 2016.
Right.
So we know that, we're used to that. So that's the reality of this war, which we already have for 8 years and lost 13,000 people with, by the way, almost 1 million of internal refugees.
Got it, sir. Sir, I just want to get a quick response to that before I move on to my other panelists. Mr. Solodov, would you like to respond to that? The point that it is Russia, that's what, that it is Ukraine, that's what, I beg your pardon, it's Russia which Ukraine asserts has been stepping up the violence. How would you respond to that, that in the last week it's Russia which is triggering unrest along that line of contact?
Well, first of all, I'd like to stress that Russia is not moving anywhere. Russia stands where it is within its borders. And as I told you already, President's decision was made basing on the escalation that we have witnessed for these recent months.
Right.
Actually, that's why the decision came out. And speaking about kindergarten, you don't mention how many kids were killed in Donbass. Why so? Let's speak of all of the victims. I think it's just simply unfair.
All right. Dr. Mridula Ghosh, you've lived in Ukraine for several decades. You are a senior lecturer over there. Could you describe to us and give us your sense of where this is going? Does this end with the Donbass area, or based on what President Putin said yesterday, is there a sense that Ukraine could be threatened, if not today, then tomorrow?
Ukraine has been under threat for all these years. And as an Indian, I can tell you who is living in Ukraine that there is a hybrid warfare that has been waged by Russia to Ukraine. And these elements of this hybrid warfare consists in masking operations, which are masked and covert operations. It started from the green, polite men in Crimea. It surprised the whole world. But then we have the separatists in Donbass. Now, through the separatists, there were Russian operatives. They were working. I think the reports of the OSCE mission should be taken into account. And of course, there has been huge shelling during the past week. And I do believe there is a problem in the wording of the documentation. Mm-hmm. That is the document that was signed, the decree, which mentions that based on the expression of the will of the people and the rejection of the Minsk agreement by Ukraine. First, Minsk was not rejected. Officially, Ukraine never said, I'm rejecting from Minsk. Yes, there was a problem in implementing different parts of the Minsk agreement from both sides. But right. Ukraine never said, I'm retreating from
that
the
they
Minsk.
have withdrawn. Okay, I take that point.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I will tell you that the mentioning the point that the LNR and DNR were recognized, as you mentioned, the broadcast is not clear. So the ambiguity remains.
All right, the ambiguity connects. I get that, Dr. Ghosh. 1 second, I want to go across to Rajiv Gupta as well. Mr. Gupta, in the last few weeks, and given the tension which we see right now on the ground, how are your companies, are your business interests being impacted?
Good evening.
Good evening.
So it was a sleepless night yesterday for all of us, in Ukraine. If you frankly ask me, we are living with this current situation for the last 8 years. Yes. So this is nothing new. And every one of us was very much aware that nothing will going to happen before closing ceremony of Olympics. As a matter of fact, we start evacuating our people from Sunday morning. And the announcement was made in the Sunday evening. So
evacuating from
it was
where,
quite
Mr.
predictable
Gupta?
for all of us.
Evacuating from where?
From Donetsk and Lugansk region, our employees' families.
How many people do you have employed in Donetsk and Lugansk?
See, we are having around 1,200 people working with us in Ukraine, out of which around 60 people are in Ukraine, in Donetsk and Lugansk. This is a part of Ukraine, yeah.
And so you've had to evacuate them. What are they saying as they came back?
See, this is kind of a precautionary measure to take them from the territory which can be vulnerable,
Right. Did they witness a lot of the fighting, or they hear some of the shelling?
Yet nothing. Yeah.
Nothing
yet. Yeah.
And so therefore, what are your plans in terms of the business that you run? Markets around the world have tanked. The business environment has literally been shot. What are you going to do in the immediate run?
So stay calm and work as routine, This is the most important thing. As our president of Ukraine announced yesterday, stay calm. Ukraine is like a nation with a cool head and reacts calmly. That's an important thing.
All right. Anubhav Arya, you're a third-year student at the Ivano-Frankivsk National Medical University. You would be aware that the government of India has advised all Indian nationals to actually return if you can. Are you in a position to do that, Anubhav?
Sir, we as a student, we want to move back to India. But sir, the situation is like the price of air tickets is so high. If you will see for 26 February, you will see that it's for 1,04,000 something.
No, but what about the Air India flights and the evacuation flights? They don't call them evacuation, just extra flights which have been. So those are also of the same price?
Yes, sir. This is the Air India itself. It's for 1,06,000, sir. So
for a one-way
as a
flight,
student, we cannot manage.
For a one-way
flight, sir. Yes, for one-way flight, sir. For 26th of February, sir. And we can hear any bad news anytime, sir. So
but there are further flights. Sir, 26th of February is not the last date. So why do you not want to take a later flight?
Sir, we wanted to take the later flight, but sir, it's also not the cheapest, sir. It's also for one way, it's 60 or 65,000, sir. So it's not also practically possible.
Anubhav, I take that, I understand that, but tell me, is it also true that an online education is not being offered at this juncture for Indian students where you're studying? So therefore, coming back to India means you jeopardize your education. Is that right?
Yes, sir, it was right. But, sir, yesterday we had a protest near the university, and we had director meeting with all members. Then we have the decision that from tomorrow it will be online, and we may go to our home, but it's only for 3 weeks. Sorry, it's only for 3 weeks.
And so the expectation is that things would be better.
Yes.
Mr. Osad,
yes, if the situation will be normal.
Sure, Mr.
If the situation will be normal, then
right. I just want to go across to the MP. Sir, you've got 3 Indian nationals on this. Tatiana, I'll come to you next if you just give me half a second. Mr. Osachuk, there are 3 Indian nationals on this program. One is a very young student. He's going to be a doctor saving lives. You've got an Indian industrialist who runs the biggest Indian company in Ukraine. And you've got a very senior lecturer. People who've lived in your country and love your country. What is your message to them, their families, and all the other Indians, 25,000 who live in Ukraine?
I think we will do all our best to create comfortable conditions for everyone who is living in Ukraine, who is working in Ukraine, and who is investing in Ukraine. Russia is continuing to blackmail Ukraine and the West and making pressure on the West, but I believe that we have enough forces in Ukraine to keep them in so-called Lugansk and Donetsk republics, not letting them able to move further. Plus, I think in the next days, you will see the increasing sanctions on Russian oligarchs and on Russian black money. You know about Russian billion, which is on the West. It is all black money, and we almost agreed with UK and the United States and European Union that we will block all this money. And I think it will be extremely efficient way, much better than actual war and actual shooting or shelling to stop Russian aggression in Ukraine. So that's why my target that all these people shall continue education, shall continue work, because we have great country which have huge potential, and we have just one problem: Russian aggression.
Tatiana, respond.
That's adorable. The fact that we're still talking about Russian aggression, although Russia, as mentioned by Mr. Spokesperson, Russia has been in the same borders all this time. And Ukrainian authorities that are killing their own people that decided they didn't want anything to do with Kiev government because they were oppressed. The 80% of the population of the Donetsk and Lugansk regions that spoke Russian, that considered Russian to be their native language. And that was before the whole conflict, before the coup d'etat in Kiev that brought over the nationalist governments. And yet we still have Ukraine saying, oh, look, we're at war with Russia. You're killing your own people. Your people have no other choice than to ask for protection and to decide to separate from the country that makes them feel like second-rate people. I'm sorry, Mr. MP, but this is ridiculous.
All right. Well,
there has been no proof of Russian aggression throughout all these 8 years that you're crying that you have Russian boots on Ukrainian ground. Prove it.
We're not
Show
crying, my
any
friend.
pictures. There are no pictures. There are no pictures. There's no proof. You're just very loudly accusing somebody of something.
All right. Look, I think
I'm sorry.
I get the point here. Tatiana, I do get the point that you're making. The Ukrainians obviously disagree, and this is a topic which is bound to get very, very heated. And I'm sure I'd like to continue with this, and I will certainly invite both of you back onto this program. But I think, as I told you, Tatiana, last night, in our discussion, let's all hope the one thing we can all agree on, there needs to be peace and no loss of life. I'm sure we can all agree on that. Let's hope that that is the case. Thank you all very much for being with us. I'm now joined by Shashank Joshi. He's the defense editor of The Economist and a former senior research fellow at the Royal United Services Institute. Thanks, Shashank, very much for being with us. Now, the forces that Russia presently has on the ground, the Navy, the armed forces on the ground, the Army and the Air Force, the numbers go between 1.5 and 1.9 lakhs. They haven't gone back anywhere. What does that mean?
Well, I think the first thing to remember is that this is the biggest military deployment that we've seen in Europe since the Cold War, possibly for 40, 50 years. It's huge. It is about 2/3 of Russia's combat potential, about 110 battalion tactical groups, which are the fighting formations that Russia uses. Each of those is about 1,000 troops. And the majority of those, I think about 2/3 of those, are in extremely advanced positions. In other words, they're a few kilometers from the border of Ukraine, either on the Russian side or to the north, let's not forget, on the Belarus side, where Russia also has about 30,000 troops. So for me, the central question as we think about these latest moves is this: if Vladimir Putin is content with only the recognition of the two Donbass republics, which some people claim, and I think is quite wrong, why are these military forces still in highly advanced positions? Some of them, by the way, very far away from camps or bases, troops sleeping in their vehicles in freezing conditions. And my answer to that is that I think a major attack on Ukraine is still very likely in the coming days, because simply recognizing the Donbass republics and moving forces into those, which formalizes a state of affairs that's existed for 8 years, that does not satisfy the Kremlin if it wants to change the circumstances, change the strategic orientation of the government in Kiev. I still think we are looking at major escalation very, very imminently.
A major escalation to what end? An effort at regime change in Ukraine? The reason why some people would suggest that that is difficult is because Ukraine's forces are not a pushover, and you would ultimately need boots on the ground, and the numbers of Ukrainian soldiers formidable. And then the potential losses on either side would be huge, and this could be a conflict that could go on for years. Would that make sense for Russia?
I think the aim would be to change the regime in some fashion, and I think that Russia believes that it would be able to do so at relatively acceptable cost. And I would say that if you look at only the eastern parts of Ukraine, along with Kiev, you're looking at about 18 million people. If you look at the southern coastline, you're adding another 3 million people in. And then you look at the number of forces that you already outlined, about 190,000 or so. If we calculate all of that, the force ratios, the ratio of foreign troops to population in those areas, is not all that different to that which existed for the Americans in Iraq in 2003. Now, okay, that isn't the most successful example, but they did feel able to initiate and mount an occupation of the entire country.
So let's see.
What's more, I think, is Vishnu, is they would be looking to recruit substantial numbers of local collaborators in Ukraine, much as they have in the Donbass. So I think they feel they can do it.
All right. I'm just having to wrap this up, out of time. But thanks so much, Shashank, for joining me and sharing your thoughts on the situation over there. Lots of comments coming in. Kalpesh writes in, says, is the future of European security and the post-Cold War international order at stake? Pavan Singh says, an act of war, violation of international law. We'll take a short break. More coming up.